Hello and welcome to Office Hours. My name is David Bird. I am VP of Growth and Strategy for Infinx, and I am joined by our Chief Product Officer, Navaneeth Nair. We're here today to talk about integration for patient access with EMRs. So before we begin, Navaneeth, why don't you give our audience a little bit of background about yourself, and then we'll dive deep into the discussion around integration in EMRs.
Sure. Thank you for having me, David. I'm the Chief Product Officer for Infinx, as you said. I've been with Infinx for 5 years. I've been in healthcare for 20 plus years, working both with kind of large payers and providers. And one of the things that has stuck with me is for how intertwined we are in the healthcare space with respect to delivering value to our customers. How much of interoperability is still a problem within healthcare compared to every other industry. In today's world, you can swipe your card or do your Apple Pay or Google Pay, and you have Stripe or PayPal or somebody else do your payment, and it gets processed within seconds. And we still struggle kind of getting together kind of providers and payers. So I've seen this firsthand, and I've been really interested in how do we solve some of these problems.
Very good. So from your perspective, why is the EMR integration critical for patient access solutions and the adoption of that?
Yeah, I think let's kind of start with the notion of why are patient access solutions relevant while we have an EMR, right? One of the things we see it here at Infinx, and we have seen with other customers, is that the EMR is a very patient-centric solution, and in many cases, I think I'll get beaten up if I said it's provider-centric, but at least it's provider-facing with respect to its capabilities. But when it comes to actually interfacing with the payer, it does struggle, right? And which means a lot of the payer-related processes, when you think about patient access, are limited in most EMRs, even the best of the breed ones. And that's primarily because of just what I said earlier, which is kind of the interoperability issues. They're not very focused, which means you always have a room for a third-party patient access solution that helps you from everything from patient financial clearance to medical necessity to prior authorization. Now, the challenge is you really have this process of interacting with the payer. It falls in the middle of the business process of interacting with the patient, right? What I mean by that is you have a patient who you need to schedule for an appointment or for a surgery. You get their financial information or their insurance information, and you are trying to now verify that they have eligibility, what their out-of-pocket could be, whether they have primary versus secondary insurance, whether this process needs prior authorization. All of this needs you to go out and reach out to payers, either via faxes, portals, or other forms. So a third-party patient access solution allows you to actually manage and manifest most of these workflows very well. Now, but this workflow sits right in the middle of the process of a scheduler who's also trying to schedule the patient, right? So interoperability between any patient access solution that supports these payer functions and the scheduler or the front office staff they're trying to get the patient through is very important, right? So that's that's one of the reasons I feel it's very critical that if you try to deploy a patient access solution that helps you with some of these payer functions, but they're not integrated into your EMR, then the workflow becomes very complex. That's one thing. The other thing is between the EMR and the plethora of other systems that you already are faced with, the front office staff is already concerned about the number of things they're switching around with. They're picking up a phone, they're having to deal with the fact they already have an EMR in front of them. In some cases, there are standalone scheduling softwares that they are working with. If you add another software in the mix that is a standalone software, now it's another software that they have to transition from a workflow perspective. So if you can have them integrated into your kind of patient experience workflow, which the EMR provides, I would say it kind of adds most value.
So when you talk about the payer functions and the integration to those payer functions, just so our audience is clear, the patient access is also the financial experience of that patient, correct? So are you talking about eligibility and benefits, patient pay estimation, those types of connectivities with the payer and the interaction with that?
That is correct, right? So when you think about when does a provider interface with the payer, we usually tend to think of that interface as claims, right? Because traditionally that's what we do. We interface to submit claims, get the claims approved, get EOBs posted, right? Things of that nature. But as you can imagine, as we have kind of moved really to the front office being a critical component of financial compliance and verification with respect to patients, the front office staff is now burdened to have to do a lot of the financial verification before the patient is, I would say, scheduled for service, right? Otherwise, you are looking at either COB denials or eligibility denial, prior denials, things that are difficult to actually recoup dollars on. So now that you have transferred a lot of these financial verification steps, as you said, eligibility, benefits, patient estimates, discovering if there is a primary versus a secondary insurance, or prior auth, which kind of is the biggest piece of it, right? So when you move these to the front office, now the front office is not only having to deal with the patient, but they also have to deal with the payer, because they are trying to verify these pieces. That's the piece that I think patient access solutions play an important piece in kind of solving for.
And so what are the different types of integration that a third-party system can support with an EMR?
Yeah, I think there are multiples of them, and they kind of depend on the type of EMR systems. And at Infinx, we have seen the entire gamut. And I'll talk about them in different forms, right? So you have, I would just the market makers or the market leaders, right? The Epics or the Cerners of the world. Now they have out of the box always supported some form of integration into the payer systems because they were large enough. And in some cases, they were working directly with payers. So you would think that they support something like the EDI X12 standards, which essentially is the true standard that the payers adopt for integration within their systems. But these large platforms also support, in the recent years, they've created their own marketplaces, created their own custom integration and API capabilities. For example, Epic has its own App Orchard, which effectively is a marketplace, which offers a set of services that third-party systems can use to integrate into Epic. Now, over a period of time, they have started to adopt newer standards like FHIR, which I'll touch upon in a little while. But essentially, some of the larger ones have their own standards that they work with, offer a marketplace, whether it's an Epic or a Cerner or an Athena. Some of the other ones that we work with, essentially the most common standard form most EMRs support, which essentially is I would say inter-system communication model called HL7, which is used for most communications. I would say for what I call intra-provider systems, right? So communicating between practice management and a billing system, or a scheduling software and a practice management software. And the best, I would say the most widest, I should not say the best, the most widest adoption capabilities around these HL7s. And now why is that? Because primarily most of these systems over a period of time had to support HL7 as a standard just for the intercommunication between the different provider systems. So it is something that is a native capability for most systems, even the more antiquated platforms usually support it out of the box. So it's usually an easy way to integrate a third-party solution into EMR. Now, some of the newer cloud-based products that we have seen in the market and that we work very closely with also support native API-based integrations. In these scenarios, they are custom APIs supported by them. They are not just HL7 standards. They may not have a standard associated to it. They may be just native, and in some cases, those custom APIs allow you to do the functions that you're trying to perform. In those cases, you actually use those custom APIs for integration. We have many cloud-based EMR partners that we work with that actually we have a very tight integration. And a native API integration, I think, is the best because it's the most it's the most responsive in itself. It's easier to provide real-time updates when you get information back from the payer, and actually be very custom to the workflow, right? It makes it far more seamless within the life cycle. But I think the standard that I think eventually everybody will have to migrate to in some shape or form is what is referred to as FHIR, right? So FHIR is a industry standard that is being adopted across the board at this point in time. We are seeing, again, this is very early stages from the adoption of the standard, but it is something that everybody should watch out for. Right? So what is FHIR? Right? So FHIR, it came across during the digitization phase, post the ACA and the Obamacare, and it stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. It's actually done by the HL7 standard body. Now, what is interesting about FHIR is that it actually makes most of these integrations into these EMRs API driven. So they become, most EMRs will become API centric because they will support FHIR. FHIR is an API based standard. But what is more interesting further ahead, and we can touch on it, is that I eventually see payers adopting the same standard, because today there are two different standards. There is HL7, which is, I would say, inter-provider system communication channel, and then you have X12 as the standard to communicate with payers, right? So provider systems communicate in a different language, and when you have to talk to a payer, you have to talk in a different language, right? It's like you and I can talk English, but if I had to talk to somebody else, I would know Swahili, which is kind of difficult, right? But eventually, I think we'll all talk the same language, and it'll be FHIR, is my belief.
Got it. What are some of the challenges that you see in EMR integration for specifically patient access solutions?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge we see is I would say the diversity of the EMR systems and their ages. And at Infinx we see all of them, right? We see everything from the epics to the really small ones that are very specific to a specialty. Now we all recognize that these EMR systems serve a specific purpose, and they have utility or specialty around a specific domain or specialty, but they all don't adopt the same set of standards, right? So every time you are having a conversation, it essentially means that you have to be system specific. And you and I know this. Every time we have a conversation with a new prospect or a new customer, the first concern they have is, have you dealt with my X system? Which we have had for 20 years. So that, I would say, that the diversity or the veracity of the systems is the first challenge. The other is, even though we kind of talk about HL7 being a standard, what we have seen is that many systems continue to be closed systems, right? They seem to be their own little islands. And what islands do is make it difficult to build bridges, right? So that's kind of where we live in. And what that leads to is that they may support HL7 for certain functions, but they don't support it for many of the other functions. So it's a limited set, or the HL7 is not accessible for an external third-party system to work with. So when you kind of deal with systems like this, it becomes difficult. Now, when it comes to larger systems, as much as they offer a third-party integration, they are always challenged by IT resources to be able to implement them, right? As much as Epic has created an app market or Cerner has created open code kind of platforms, these implementations they are not seamless, right? And I'll use the Stripe example. If payment is done through Stripe, you just have to implement the Stripe API. You never have to talk to Stripe. You don't have to get a Stripe consultant to work with you. It just works. But when you talk about these third-party APIs that are supported within EMRs, you need an EMR Epic consultant, or you need an Epic specialist to actually set it up for you. What that does is it makes it difficult to get prioritization given the amount of IT investment that is going on in these spaces to get priority on operational integrations of this nature, especially third-party integration. So on the lower end of the spectrum, as you can see, they are closed systems and they just don't have the ability, and you really have to kind of figure out how to get into them and solve for them. And on the high end, even though they have the sophistication, it still is not like a kind of self-serve, right? Until they are self-serve, it still has the same challenge as a closed system. So we see that on both ends of it. It's not limited to the smaller guys are difficult to work with. I think across the spectrum right now, implementation becomes difficult because just getting the IT attention and the IT span becomes difficult. And today, none of these implementations channels that I've talked about really can be done without IT. I mean, you still need some amount of IT engagement. At Infinix, what we've done is we've actually kind of standardized around some of these very standard channels, especially HL7 and others, which make us, I would say, as frictionless from an IT perspective as we have iterated over a period of time, because we recognize the challenge. But it still is a challenge for most organizations, I would say, when they're trying to do third-party integrations.
Do you see any difference in the EMRs that maybe have come out in the last 5 years versus those industry giants that have been around for a while? I mean, are their APIs any easier to integrate with, or is it still a challenge because of the things you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think the problem that I see with even the latest, I think they're easier in the sense that they are more cloud native, they're more API native with respect to integrations.
Yeah.
But the problems I see is that many of what I just referred to as what I call pair functions done by the front office, right? Whether that is eligibility or patient estimates, there isn't very clear processes or steps within the workflow within the EMR. So even if there is an API, it's not easy to consume it, because some of these process steps, just to be clear, are not, hey, fire and forget, right? I mean, a prior auth is a classic example. There isn't a way to just kind of, hey, I submitted prior auth and within a few seconds I got a prior auth. I mean, it doesn't happen in most cases. You're submitting a prior auth. In most cases, the payers don't have an integration available, so you have to figure out a third-party mechanism to do it. But even if you do that, clinicals have to be submitted. Then you have to wait on it. You have to know that the payer completed it. So this life cycle is asynchronous and takes a bunch of time. And what we see is that even though the latest cloud-based EMRs are getting better with the APIs, they still don't support these kinds of functions where it's a long-running asynchronous kind of life cycle with the payer. This is why third-party solutions are important, because they allow you to manage the workflow. But other than that, their direct integration with the payer still suffers.
Understood. When you look at the larger EMRs like an Epic and a Cerner, what types of integration do they support?
Yeah, I think Epic of all of them is the most sophisticated with respect to the type of integrations it supports. It out of the box actually supports all the forms that I just described, right? Epic has a very early implementation of FHIR that they are actually promoting quite a bit, right? Which is kind of the latest standard. They've always supported HL7, but only for limited processes. They've had their custom APIs for a very long period of time for certain functions, and as I said, talking about like the app store, app marketplace mechanism, I think they've kind of matured their marketplace over a period of time. Now, again, they are not as frictionless as downloading an app on your iPhone, but at least there is a way to kind of discover apps and be able to implement it, right? So I would say Epic is farther ahead. I think when I look at like the Cerners and Allscript, they all have had developer programs for some time for integration for third-party systems, with varying degrees of success. Some of them have more mature systems, like Cerner has kind of under the kind of new ownership of Oracle, kind of tried to become more developer friendly with more code related solutions, or what they call as code, which is kind of, I think, the Cerner open development experience. And we are seeing them start to make some strides. I don't know how far. The problem I see with Cerner implementations is that as much as they're trying to offer these cloud systems, their implementations are very legacies, right? So is it compatible with the Millennium or the Saurian version you have, right? If it doesn't, then does it even work, right? So that's kind of the limitation on some of these, is that how legacy is your implementation. I mean, that applies to Epic also. But Epic actually has more of a backup compatibility, can support fair bit of Epic versions around it. Cerner is new to it. I would say the others are a little difficult. Like Athena has a marketplace. We are actually on the Athena marketplace with our prior art solution. And we see that there is support, but again, it's not custom. So when we have to understand a certain process, we have to map it ourselves and figure out how to build it. And we got great support from Athena, but they are not going to create custom APIs to support you, right? So it kind of varies across some of these things. Again, as I said before, so if there is more FHIR adoption across the board, and support for something like Smart FHIR and some of the newer programs that are coming up, I think we'll see some standardization. But right now, it's a spectrum. It's a very wide spectrum.
I'd say you just mentioned futures, so I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball here and give us some insight into what the future looks like with the integration between providers and payers. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, I think unfortunately everything in healthcare is glacial, so it's kind of crystal ball has to look very far out. Unfortunately, as you and I live our lives to look for. But where is the puck headed, right? I believe eventually, I think there will be enough maturity within the FHIR platform structure that I talked about, that it will get adopted. And if I'm, again, having lived in healthcare, you and I know that the only way we all move is two ways, right? The government tells us or the consumer tells us, right? I believe in the case of interoperability, I think it'll be regulation that was going to tell us to do this. I'm already seeing some early stage regulations that were passed during the Trump administration to support, I would say, burden easing for prior authorization through interoperability. That did not get moved further ahead, but I'm seeing the latest I saw is that the Biden administration is trying to push something where the CMS is going to mandate that Medicare Med Advantage plans essentially have to support prior auth, and other interoperability functions to ease the burden. So what the only way, and they have explicitly listed out FHIR as the mechanism to do it, right? So I see some regulatory pressure coming over the next few years. I know the AMA has been out there talking about how eligibility still costs $11 because you have to be on the phone with BCBS for 20 minutes. And these things are starting to gain a little bit of a groundswell in my mind, right? So payers at some point will have kind of adopt standards, not because they want to do it, but because regulation is going to demand it, right? So I see FHIR becoming kind of a default standard. I know there's an entire program that HL7 is running around burden reduction for prior auth and other programs. So we see that becoming a little bit of the standard that both payers and providers will support. I think that the challenge I see as I look into the looking glass of the future is I think the diversity of platforms, both on the payer side and the provider side, still is going to be a challenge. As much as I want to believe that, oh, let's assume we all are FHIR based and we have interoperability. Yay, right? But wait a minute, there are 200 payers and there are 250 different EMRs, right? So think about 200 by 250 in terms of the combinations that have to be supported to make somebody successful, right? Because the moment you have like, you say, oh, I can do this with Anthem and Humana, but then I have to pick up the phone or I have to deal with the facts with 5 other plans, you lose the efficacy, right? So the way I look at it into the future is that we'll start seeing payer adoption of FHIR. Provider systems are already starting to support it, but I still believe intermediary platforms are going to play a critical role in being able to marry the end by end combination of provider systems and payer systems, right? So help normalize, like we do at Infinix, we normalize across all the payers so customers can submit transaction in one form, in one standard from their EMR to all the payers, right? That's what we do. So we see, I see value kind of in intermediary platforms like ours to really kind of play even a bigger role, because now standards and interoperability will be there, but you still have to marry the kind of plug the switches across all of these payers and provider systems. So the more I look at it, I think standards driven by regulation, easing the burden, but the burden will not ease anytime soon unless we can kind of plug all these systems together.
So one of the things you mentioned outside of regulation was consumerism, and as we see healthcare moving more and more into a consumer type environment versus just strictly a healthcare environment, how do you think, and this is kind of a little bit of out left field, how do you think digital mobile apps are going to play into pushing payers and providers to integrate the data? I mean, you can now schedule on your phone an appointment at the doctor's office. You can make payments on your phone for your bills from the physician or the hospital market. Do you think consumerism is going to have a bigger drive in forcing the payers and the providers to integrate and pass data, or are you thinking no, it's more along the lines of regulation?
No, I think both of them will
have to
contribute.
Keep up with the consumer. Yeah,
I think it'll both be. So I think you and I are both seeing the trends around consumerism. I think a couple of trends that kind of impact on consumerism, right? It's also the provider behavior is changing. The reason we are having this conversation about patient access solutions or front office related solutions is because there's a lot more of financial responsibility being put on the front office other than patient experience, right? So we are seeing that trend continue to increase. Now, as that financial engagement prior to service continues to increase, you will have to engage the patient, and the patient has to be engaged through financial engagement tools in some shape or form. Today, we are very focused on, hey, are you scheduled? Can you schedule on a mobile phone, or can you schedule via chat, or whatever it is, right? So that's kind of the first thing we do, because we want to get the patient to come through the door. But pretty soon, I think, and we're seeing early signs of this with some of the larger systems trying this, where they, oh, you want to come in, and by the way, here are the services that you're scheduled for, and by the way, your payer kind of thinks that you will be paying out of pocket because it's all within your deductible, or wait a minute, it's going to be a 20% co-insurance, and that means it's going to approximately cost you $500, right? Do you want to just put in your credit card here and give the information, so you don't have to worry about it when you come in, it's all processed. So we see that engagement kind of continuing to move to the tip of the sphere with the consumer. And the more that engagement of financial engagement continues to move to the tip of the sphere, more this interoperability becomes important, because you need now the eligibility information having pre-processed. You need the benefits being available. You need to know whether they have coordination of benefits across multiple primary and secondary insurances. You need to know whether prior authorization. So these questions have to be answered before you engage the patient, so you can engage them more effectively. So I think I believe it will also play an equally important role. I only highlight regulation because, as with everything else, we've seen that has a higher impact. We are one of those industries where the government sets the rules and kind of innovate. So I expect CMS to push us equally as the consumer does. So I think both of them will play a role.
Awesome. This has been very beneficial, Navaneeth. Appreciate your time and the insights, and look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.